Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the podcast. I'm your host, Pete Lieb, and as always, I'm glad you joined me again today. I have a great show planned tonight, and I'm going to jump right in. Tonight, I'm going to take on the mindset of the serial killer. What motivates a person to kill another for enjoyment or for sport or, whatever those reasons might be? What's the psychological makeup of a person who feels this compulsion to go so far outside of society's norms? Would seem to require a great amount of motivation, but most people certainly don't fathom what that might be. So what do we do to understand the incomprehensible? Well, the only way we've really known at this point is simply to ask. The psychological profiling of a serial killer arguably seems to have been pioneered by the FBI and Robert Ressler and John Douglas back in the 70s. They wrote a book about it called Mindhunter. It was actually a great book. I've got it in the bookshelf. It spawned a couple of movies. It has a Netflix series. Again, very good. But through their work, they came to understand that there were also potentially markers and events in a person's life which could potentially predict the future bad behavior. You may not simply be born bad or possessed by the devil, as it used to be, but instead maybe a product of your environment and your life experiences. The idea that killers potentially were made rather than born only seemed to ramp up the interest. I mean, it is everywhere right now. My guest tonight is Mr. Christopher Berry-Dee, and he also chronicled the life of a serial killer, which became the inspiration for a major motion picture. It was titled Monster. It was the life of Aileen Wuornos. It was a movie starring Charlize Theron. I'm sure you've heard of it. Christopher is an investigative criminologist, the world's #1 true crime author, owner and editor-in-chief of The Criminologist, the world's most respected and oldest journal. It's on matters concerning law enforcement, penology, forensic psychiatry, psychology, and penal reform. He was appointed the director of the Criminal Research Institute in 2005. He is a writer of some 36 books, including titles like the Talking with Serial Killers series, Born Killers, Childhood Secrets of the World's Deadliest Serial Killers, and the previously mentioned Monster, My True Story. His most recent book is Talking with Serial Killers, Stalkers, and it's out now everywhere. He has been the face-to-face and spoken to some of the world's most famous serial killers, including Ted Bundy, Aileen Wuornos, Arthur Shawcross, and many more. Christopher frequently appears on television documentaries as a leading authority on serial homicide and has worked with numerous news agencies to include the UK Mail and the Mail on Sunday. And actually, if you're watching the video portion right now, I do have some screenshots of the covers of the books on the video right now. Once again, we have an audio version and a video. You can find us on YouTube and Rumble. Chris has extensively lectured on his given subject to law enforcement, and he has worked with law agencies in Russia, where he gained exclusive access to many of the country's most dangerous male and female killers. His bio is long and varied. You can find out more about Chris on his website, ChristopherBerry-Dee.com, and all of his books can be found and purchased through all leading bookstores and online. So, after all of that lead-in, let me go ahead and say welcome, Christopher, to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Pete. Yeah, absolutely fantastic, and thanks so much for inviting Humble me on your show.
No, no problem. I appreciate that. So thank you for making time for me to today again. We had to coordinate a bit based on our locations. I'm in Florida. Where are you located currently?
I'm in the UK on the South Coast.
So I know this is a bit of a dark subject, but it's one that holds just fascination for a huge segment of the population, myself included. I've done several podcasts where we regularly discuss true crime or serial murder, things like that. If you don't mind, if you could start us off with just a little bit more of your history and how you got from where you started to where you are right now.
Yes, well, to cut it short, I was a former Royal Marine Commando Special Forces Green Beret for a number of years. Mm-hmm. I got into interrogation work in the Far East and in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. And that was about manipulating or getting inside the head of terrorists. Fascinating, different mindset to serial killers, obviously. And that set me on the road to wanting to study these characters, like one would do, excuse my phone pinging, like one would study a blowfly in amber, under a microscope. In other words, I wanted to look at it without any emotions whatsoever. And my Special Forces training has conditioned me to be able to work with these people, listen to what they tell me, look at the damage they've done with ice running through my veins. So in other words, I do not let them know that what they're telling me is upsetting me, because that is a form of manipulation by them.
Right. Did you learned this technique through the military? Did they have formal coursework and things like that taught you that, or was it just osmosis?
Well, I think it's osmosis, really. We did. Obviously, interrogation training is very harsh in the forces. It does toughen you up mentally. But I actually developed this buddy way of dealing with these killers, because and it becomes a tool in law enforcement's box occasionally. I've cleared up some cold cases in United States with Arthur Shawcross, the Monster of the Rivers, 2 homicides with him, another 2 with Michael Ross, who's since been executed in Connecticut. That would be Zung Nok Tu, who he strangled and threw over a gorge into a river, and a young girl called Kimberly Logan, who was murdered at Crystal Run in New York State. My technique is rather similar to what the police call the Reed technique. In other words, it's not confrontational. When I was an interrogator in the forces, you had this good man, bad man type of approach.
Right.
You get one guy's nice and the other one's a bastard. Nowadays, it's much more subtle. What your viewers might like to look at is the long Reed technique interview done with a Colonel Russell Williams, who was the head of procurement and ran the largest Canadian Air Force base. His name is Colonel Russell Williams. And he's brought in on a Sunday to sit next to a Detective Sergeant Smythe, who is well trained in the Reed technique. And you watch how Smythe takes apart this colonel. And it is fascinating for your viewers to watch. It is instructive. It's the gold standard, that interview. So, it was osmosis. I learned as I went along. I made mistakes, obviously, like we all do.
Sure.
But I developed this buddy technique. And, of course, when a serial killer, say, is in America and he gets an approach from an Englishman who's prepared to fly all that way to, say, New York State or Florida, for instance, let's say come down to Tallahassee or wherever it is, and Texas, then it boosts their ego. So you're on, and the other thing is you've got to know as much about their history before you meet them as possible. In other words, everything about them. So you are in control, or they think that they're in control.
Did you were you involved in those police? You'd mentioned a couple of things where you helped the police solve cases. Were you involved in that prior to the interviewing of the serial killers, or did that come as a result of your notoriety from the interviews?
It came as the result. It came as the latter. For instance, I'd been corresponding with Michael Ross, the roadside strangler, for 2 years. He had IQ of 155. He was a Cornell graduate. Wow. He looked like the boy next door with glasses. Killed 7 young girls, terrible things to 2 little schoolgirls, which I won't mention on air. But I developed this sort of a relationship with him, and then I went out there and interviewed him on tape. And he was my first serial killer at Summers Prison. That's a shithole, that prison. It was all painted brown. I don't know where they got the brown paint from, but that's the old Summers Prison. And I interviewed him on tape, and then I gained his confidence, and I said, look, we're going to bring a film crew over. And of course, he loved that. It was massaging his ego.
Right.
And we took a film crew there. But the night before, Pete, what happened was the state police came to my hotel quite as a surprise and said, you know, Christopher, we've got 2 unsolved homicides here and we need something from Michael because he won't talk to us. He's too cocky. He'd already confessed to 5. So they gave me some material and photographs and stuff that only the police knew about. And during the televised interview, which is you can get online, I actually said to Michael, Mike, you're not a big hitter. You're not a Ted Bundy. You're not a Henry Lee Lucas. You're not, you know, you've only killed 7. No, you've only killed 5. I said, that's nothing. And he said, no, I've killed 7. And I said, no, you haven't. You've killed 5. You've been telling everybody you killed 5. And he got really upset and he said, are you calling me a liar? I'm your friend. I said, no. I said, who was it then? And he blurted it out. But I then said about Kimberly Logan, I said, well, with Kimberly, what did you do with the body, Michael? And he looked at me and he said, oh, I left it by a stone wall. There was a willow tree and a bit of a muddy stream, the Crystal Run. And I had the photographs of where that girl had been dumped, and it was exactly right. And only he would have known that, and the police.
What are some of the other techniques? I mean, you've interviewed now more than 30 serial killers. How do you obtain the interviews? What are some of the techniques that you use to get in the door with them? I'm sure now there's almost some pseudo-celebrity to being a killer. I mean, you are a celebrity if you kill more than one person and you're in jail and you get that moniker of a serial killer. How do you obtain the interviews? What do you do to get in the door with them and get them talking?
Right. Okay. Let's just say, I know Americans, I love Tallahassee, I love Florida. Okay. I love it. The thing is, it's like going fishing or going on a hunting expedition. You know where the fish swim, you know what bait they might take, and you know where to cast your line, hopefully, to get a bite. The same with hunting. You know where the animals are. You've got to be very cunning and careful to get up close before you fire your fatal shot. You don't get a second chance with a serial killer. You blow it on the first one, you lose them. They're very cunning. Mm-hmm. They can smell a rat a mile away. One that will make most of you smile, I think, is Melanie McGuire, the Ice Queen from Trenton, New Jersey. And she murdered she was an upscale woman, quite attractive in her day, 2 beautiful kids. Husband was wealthy, and she was having an affair with another doctor, and she decided that she'd get rid of her husband by chopping him up, putting him into suitcases and throwing the suitcases in the Chesapeake Bay. Well, some fishermen out in their boats, the suitcases bobbed up, and I mean, you can imagine when they opened them what they thought. She was found guilty at trial, and she became known as the Ice Queen, the femme fatale. And I'm in the UK, and she's getting inundated with press inquiries, book promises of books, everything. And she's in this stinking prison in Trenton somewhere. So what I did was, I knew her background. I knew she was upscale. I knew she was classy. I knew she liked the finest foods. I did all that bit. So what I did was, I typed a letter on cream conqueror paper, and I wrote her name in pen, Dear Melanie, and signed it Christopher, and put my family wax seal on the bottom. And I put it in a similar envelope with an airmail sticker, and I sprayed it liberally with Ego is Chanel. Now, think latterly. She's in a prison with who she thinks, all her friends, are lowlifes and prison correctional officers who she regards as thick and stupid. And she's being inconvenienced. And all of a sudden, with all this mail, she picks up this one with an airmail stamp, and she looks at the quality of the paper. And then, wow, she opens it, and there's that familiar smell, because she recognized it straight away, she told me. That was something she would go back to again and again. So I got her exclusive story the first time round.
Wow. What are a couple of who are a couple of the people who gave you probably the best insight? I don't necessarily know. I mean, do you feel, have there ever been a moment when you felt fear of someone that you were talking to, or is it more just some of them give you better insight than others, some of them are better conversationalists than others? Who are a couple of the ones that really kind of were able to give you some real insight into maybe the thought process versus just I'm a crazed lunatic and the ravings of a madman?
Right. Well, I've got it. Well, let's go to the one that is one of the most infamous. Yeah, he was the most boring serial killer I've ever met, and that's Henry Lee Lucas out of Huntsville.
Yeah.
Thick as pig shit. He actually said to me, Chris, I done killed no one. And then he said, but I done kill my mum, and then I killed my sister for killing my mum. I mean, the guy was not bright. So you didn't learn anything from Henry at all. God bless him. He's dead now. He died of natural causes, but you didn't get anything. There was nothing constructive. Then I interviewed Douglas Daniel Clark, the Sunset Slayer at San Quentin State Prison on death row. And if you can find my uncut interview with him on interview on the internet, you'll probably find it by going to Wikipedia and going to the bottom of the page and clicking on it. He was ranting and raving and shackled and using the foulest language, quite terrifying. His teeth were all rotten. He was in a foul mood. But again, his was a rant, and it took me a long time to eventually say to him, look, Dougie, shut the fuck up. We're making a television program here. You're just going on and on. But what he said actually made a lot of sense. One of the most interesting ones was J.R. Robinson, John Robinson, the Bodies in the Barrels murderer. I never met him, but I set up a sting operation with an officer, special agent, a female from the FBI. I was writing to him, because he's already pled guilty to about 6 murders, and he's on death row. And he's a jumped up little horrible man with glasses. He's the first internet stalking serial killer, used the internet with BDSM chat rooms. And all his bodies ended up in barrels. So I wrote to him. He wanted to do a book, but he wanted so much money. He was just full of rubbish. And he said, I've never been into BDSM or anything like that. It's all lies. It's all like fake news. But at the same time, he was writing to what he thought was a beautiful BDSM girl. And the agent was using fake photographs and saying, I'd like to become my slave master. So he was telling her one thing and telling me the next. And when I got fed up with him and I thought enough is enough, I told him what I'd done. And he climbed the wall. He went ape, apparently.
So you catfished him. You made him think you were talking to someone else.
Yeah.
That's excellent. That is funny. Let me go back real quick to Henry Lee Lucas. You just mentioned him. Did you get a sense? I know that he did kill some people. There were murders that he did, but he has admitted to something like 100 of them. I mean, at one point there were law enforcement officials coming from all over the country down into Texas just to get him to admit to their open case so they could close it. But when you look at the timelines on, he made this murder, he admitted to this murder in Minnesota on a Tuesday, and he admitted to this murder in Idaho on a Wednesday afternoon. It's like, how the hell did you get there? Driving from Minnesota when they were on the road, it was his partner, right? I don't know who that, it was his,
Otis Tool.
Yeah.
Otis Tool.
So was it a matter of he was trying to prolong his life by admitting to these things and keep his life going? Or I just have a hard time believing that, like you said, somebody that dense, somebody that, obviously just mentally deficient was able to be that prolific, or was he just admitting to anything they gave him?
Right. Well, I spent a lot of time with my crew and with law enforcement down in Texas working on Henry. Mm-hmm. Yes, he killed a few people. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. In fact, he was in prison, and he said, look, he literally didn't want to come out of prison. He was having nightmares about his mother, and he said, if you throw me out of prison, he said, I'll leave somebody on your doorstep. And he did. The next day they found a body a mile away. He's definitely a stone cold killer. He killed, him and Toole murdered everything that literally walked, flew, or swam. He had sex with animals. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot of frightened chickens down in Texas. There's And yes, he killed a lot of people. He killed Granny Rich, the old dear. He killed his girlfriend, left her body hacked up under an underpass. But when he got arrested, he was in his element. He got new teeth, he got new clothes. The detectives were doing these ridiculous grip and grin photographs, smiling, arms around his shoulders. He was getting decent food. And they just said to him, Henry, you're famous. And they built up his ego. And then of course, it became a media cop circus, as you rightly say. Cops were coming from all over America.
Right.
And when I spoke to him, he said, I didn't kill that girl. I said, well, how did the police find the body? He said, well, they found the body.
Yeah.
They told me that I did it, so I signed a confession.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, so he's attributed to something like 100 murders, right? 100 open murder cases. They just kept coming down, and he kept admitting to more and more and more. I don't think there's any debate that he was killing people, for sure. I just think that there's a debate as to whether he is as prolific as they say.
Well, the question to ask is, why was he only convicted of one homicide? And that was an unknown girl, and they called her Orange Socks because her body was found in a ditch by a freeway, and the only anything she had on was orange socks. He got convicted of that. So if he's killed another 100, surely they must have found something else.
Right.
But they didn't.
Well, that's also another interesting point to me, is the dynamics of partnerships. And I don't know if you've had the ability to interview both partners. I don't know if you were able to interview Henry Lee Lucas's partner, but there are a lot of stories where cousins, you know, there was somebody, David Allen Gore here in Florida. I live in Florida as well, Northeast Florida. And he and his cousin were out murdering people. Or the Hillside Strangler, there was a partner team, if I'm not mistaken, Henry Lee Lucas and his partner. Have you had the opportunity to interview the two partners and kind of get an idea what that dynamic is like?
The only two partners I've ever interviewed, serial killers, were Cathy May Wood and Gwendolyn Graham, in separate facilities, who murdered 5 elderly women in nursing home in Grand Rapids. That's the only time I've actually interviewed both sides of a killing team. That I'm very, very pleased that you brought up David Allen Gore and Fred Waterfield.
Oh, yeah?
What a surprise for me.
Well,
and I'm going to tell you why it's a surprise.
Okay.
I have in my possession, not here where I'm working now, but over 1,000 documents relating to Gore and Waterfield, and affidavits and everything else. And I also received from Mr. Gore, who I think was a deputy sheriff, if I remember rightly, a bit like Gerard Schaefer, full confessions of what he did to his victims that had never been seen by anybody before. The flaying while the girls were alive, the burning and the cutting, hanging them up like you hung and gutted deer. And he actually turned around and said Fred was not involved with really any of this. And I read the stuff on the internet. I had an email the other day from somebody from Florida who's very, very, very into this Fred Waterfield thing. I think that Fred Waterfield needs a second look at. And I'm not one of the hang 'em and whip 'em brigade. And if I think something smells rotten, I say so. And I've said so in one of my books. I handed all this stuff, I gave a lot of this stuff to the prosecutor. And all I know is that Gore's execution was almost fast-tracked, as far as I can tell. And the prosecutor down in Florida didn't even have the decency to write to me back and say, look, we will have another look at this. So I'm glad you mentioned it. I want to get that on the record now. I feel there have been miscarriages of justice. We all know that. Mm-hmm. And just because his cousin was a killer, there's something not quite right with Fred Waterfield, and it's always bugged me.
Do you feel that he had more culpability or less? What do you mean by something about him bugs you?
Well, there was, with Fred, there was this incident where, we're going back a long way now, where
sure.
Gore raped a girl in his house or something, and she ran out naked. And this was all put down, the cops put this down to both men, when in fact the girl has given an affidavit to say, no, it was Gore that did it, and I ran out the house naked, and it was Fred that saved me from him. Do you see my point?
So it may be more of a Fred was enabling David to do what he was doing, not necessarily actively a part of it.
I think I'll try another analogy. You've got Dougie Clark, the Sunset Slayer, and you've got his sexually perverted, bog-eyed girlfriend called Carol Bundy, who's no relation to Ted. And when you watch his rant and rave on my interview with him, televised interview with him, and then you start looking at documents, you realise the cops actually partly fitted Doug up. So let's get away from the fact that all police officers are honest.
Right.
I'm doing something with somebody at Suffolk County at the moment in New York, and this was on the DeFeo case, the Amityville horror case. And I won't mention the officer's name because I don't want to blow it, but I met the officer, and he had something like a 96% conviction rate with confessions, which is about 3 times the national average, because he beat the hell out of these people and got confessions just to get promoted. So, and the judges are a lot of the judges are just as bent, to be honest.
Right.
And we've got bent cops in this country. I've spent a lot of time in the Philippines. You've got corrupt cops out there. They are a breed all to themselves. So when you look at these killers, they might seem heinous and you might think this, that, and the rest of it, but sometimes I think we've got to be open-minded and let's give this another look.
Do you happen to find, maybe you don't, I mean, they're kind of seem all over the spectrum, but in your interviews, do you see any type of commonalities between these individuals, or are they just, I mean, it's really not something you can predict? Is there some trait or some backstory that each of them tend to share?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the FBI have got a tick box list, and a lot of it comes from a dysfunctional childhood. It could be right. Alcohol abuse and drug abuse, absentee father, bad schooling, bad diet. It could be a whole lot of things. And the more of those boxes you tick, the prediction is that you're more likely to become extremely antisocial, if not violent. The flip side of the coin is Professor Elliot Layton, who's one of the world's leading forensic anthropologist and works for the FBI, is a friend of mine. We talk occasionally, very rarely. He said, well, so what? A lot of kids have these problems, but they don't turn into serial killers. So there's 2 sides of the coin there. There's one other thing I want to clear up for you. This might shock your readers. You mentioned it in your introduction, that the term serial killers was coined by Resler and co. in this FBI quantified thing. That's not true. Peter Curtin, the German serial killer, years ago, was caught by an officer called, on the tip of my tongue, Gerrit. He was like a top homicide cop in his day. And he used the word serial murder, on whatever it is in German, in one of his papers, which is available public. So Officer Jennett, he was the first one to ever use the word serial killer. It wasn't the FBI and it wasn't anybody else. I think what happened was and I might be wrong, and I get on very well with the FBI, believe you me, but where I think what Resler did, these officers would have studied serial homicide. They could not have failed to read about the Curtin case. No doubt about it. It's one of the most fantastically famous, infamous in the world. And they should have seen that the serial murderon, whatever it was used in literature way, way back between the two world wars.
Oh, so just going back real quick to when you were talking about childhood and childhood experiences, and I agree with you. It cannot just simply be you come from a single mother family, you had a bad childhood, maybe you were abused. It can't just be that, or there wouldn't be a whole lot of people left, because the majority, I would say at least half of the population of the people may not have had the best childhood. I mean, there's a lot of people who did not have a great upbringing, whether it be they weren't in a full two-parent household, they weren't shown the love that they were expecting to get. Something could have happened. So there has to be some type of a mental defect as well, whether it be psychopathy or something where they just, because you grew up poorly does not lead you to say, I'm going to start strangling and murdering people as a way of demonstrating my power or getting some kind of sexual gratification. So I think that there needs to be you can check it off that these things were part of your life, but I just can't get my brain around those being the only things. You didn't have enough love as a child, so you started to kill people. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. And really it comes down to this, I think. You've got serial killers like Ross, Shawcross, quite a number of them have got siblings. Mm-hmm. And all those, say, 3 or 4 siblings grow up in the same environment with the same amount of abuse, if any, and the same diet and everything else. But sometimes there's like the runt of the brood, the one that wants to hide behind mummy's skirts, the weaker of the thing, the one that gets bullied by his siblings. And he turns out to be the only rotten apple in the basket, while the other kids who've suffered exactly the same turn out to be perfectly honest, good, hard-working citizens. So I think part of the problem is how the child perceives the abuse it receives from its parents, and it doesn't know any better. Now, the stronger children can probably take it on the chin to a certain degree, but the weaker one can't, and therefore he develops this hatred for his mother or hatred for his father, his hatred for his grandmother, for instance. Mm-hmm. And then he develops a spite, and he wants to take his revenge out, but he can't take his revenge out on his parents. So he seeks victims in in the same likeness. Now, with Ted Bundy, as we all know, with Ted, he was jilted by a beautiful girl when he was a young man, going into politics sort of thing. Her mum and dad were very strict, upmarket, had loads of money. He fell in love with her. She jilted him because he was basically an empty kettle making a lot of noise. He took out his revenge on young women who look all identical. If you put their photographs together, they look like sisters. In fact, many of them were sorority sisters, and you will know that Ted got arrested down in Florida.
Yeah.
And I did the Kiamiga house, and I talked to the cops there about his arrest. I did some work with the FDLE down there, and that's where Ted came from.
Imagine the power of that one woman who jilted Ted Bundy. And then he went on and killed, 10 or 15 more women, 20 more women, however many it was, because of one.
50, about 50, I think.
Yeah, because of one woman who jilted him. I mean,
yes.
Meanwhile, he has a girlfriend. Meanwhile, he has a pseudo family. He has these, and you see that a lot as well. You see a lot of these serial killers who have, you said they have siblings, but they have families. They have wives, they have children, they have girlfriends with children. They are able to lie their way through day-to-day living and give the impression that they are completely normal. So that the point where in some cases, although I can't believe it, the wife will say, I didn't have any indication. I think that's bullshit. Yep. I think there's no way if you're a wife who's paying attention to your husband and he leaves goes on an all night excursions twice a month and he doesn't tell you what he's doing.
I've just written a book. It's coming out shortly. It's called Sleeping with Serial Killers, and it's exactly about that subject.
Yeah, about
women who suddenly woke up one morning. I mean, look at Jerry Brudos. I mean, his young wife was there and he was chopping up people in the garage.
Exactly.
And she says she didn't know anything about it. I mean, she must have been bloody blind or deaf or stupid. I think a combination of all three. But coming back to this, what you've just said about Ted was what they say very good looking, charming. John David Guy's Cannon, an English serial killer who I've done an awful lot of work with and wrote a book about called Lady Killer, who killed obviously the missing estate agent Susie Lamplugh and two other girls. He was very charming and well dressed and could charm women out of the blue. To some degree, so was Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler. But this is a mask they wear. This is a mask of pretense, like a camouflage, like a chameleon. They change their colours and clothes when they go through society. They are the most unsuspecting people at all. They lay on the charm, but underneath is a beast.
Yeah, the one, and I think a lot of it is maybe even their self-preservation. They want to they'll say out loud, "Well, I didn't know what was going on," because if they admit that they had some type of indication that something was happening, that they'll also be held responsible for it. But you don't get a whole lot of people like Ted Bundy's girlfriend, right? Wasn't she the one who actually initially called the tip line and said, "You know what, the sketch you're bringing out here kind of looks like my boyfriend Ted. He drives the same kind of car. He looks that same way." She had an indication and she actually acted on it, even though she didn't necessarily believe it. Even it didn't stop.
Yeah, you're talking about Anne Rule now, the journalist, the red top journalist who worked with Ted, sort of a Good Samaritans thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she sort of more or less sniffed him out. But there's one other point, that when you're married to somebody, you've got kids, and say the Green River Slayer or that lot, and they go to church every Sunday, does Sunday barbecues with the kids. He's holding down a good job. He comes home. He loves the children at weekends. He buys her gifts, and she gets a sniff of something. The woman is almost frightened to even question the guy.
Right. Yeah.
So we have to look at this. There are women. We got the Yorkshire Ripper in this country, one of the most notorious in this country, killed about 17 women, mostly hookers, not all. He was living with his wife for years, and she'd been pilloried, but hadn't got a clue.
So what about the women who do have a clue and still, all these men are getting married in prison, they're fathering children in prison. These women know what Ted Bundy is. These women know what Arthur Shawcross is. They know who these people are and what they're capable of. And
you're taking me down a road now that I'm going to have to let rip.
And they love them for whatever reason. I don't understand what the mindset is there.
They're murder groupies. That's what they are.
It's a mental illness, right? I mean, that to me is a mental illness.
They're obscene. These women who write to these killers want to have their children, have their babies, and they must have seen on the internet and on scenes of crime photographs what they've done. And yet these women, these fools, these stupid women want to marry them. They ought to be put in an electric chair and given 2,000 volts to wake the fuck up.
Or at the very least, have a pretty in-depth psychological examination, because it almost seems...
I wouldn't waste taxpayers' money on giving them any examination. Look, we look at Keith Hunter Jesperson, the happy face killer, up in Oregon, wherever it is. 6'6", 6'7" trucker, killed probably 7 girls, working girls. One he tied up, half alive, but behind the back axle of his rig.
Oof.
And dragged her about 12 miles, half alive and half dead, over the Snoqualmie Pass, until all that was left was a bit of flesh. He had so many girls writing to him. He was sending me files of letters and boasting, oh, look at this one. And there's their photographs. And one of them was a letter with a lipstick mark on it. And I wrote back to him and said, "Ooh, you covered up the name, but who give you a kiss?" And he said, "Oh, that's not lipstick, that's menstrual blood."
Yeah. See, I think these women actually, deep down, they want to be a victim. They want to be this person's victim. I mean, mentally, I think that that's what their ultimate goal is, man, they have put this person up on the pedestal. They know that he's dismembering women or strangling women or killing, whatever it is. And somewhere deep down, they want to be one of those victims. That's all I can think of, because I don't, and it's not just women, although I give men a pass because men are animals anyway. So you have women like Jodi Arias, who was a good-looking woman who shot and murdered a boyfriend, a jilted love, whatever, and she's got men lining up to be. This woman killed a man who crossed her. What is wrong with you to be writing her and wanting to be a part of that?
Yeah, she killed Travis, didn't she? The hunk. Yeah, I know, that's a terrible one. I want one thing I want to clear up. You mentioned Aileen Wuornos.
Yes.
And the book Monster, and the movie that was made from the book with Charlize Theron. I want to clear something up. I do a lot of TV debating with some very, very, very clever psychologists, psychiatrists. I mean, a lot of psychiatrists, they ought to be locked up themselves. They're idiots. But there are some very, very good ones. People like Park Dietz and people like that are on the ball. And she's always been painted as a psychopath. And I wrote a chapter in one of my books on serial killers about her, and it almost broke my heart. And when I started realizing the abuse that little girl had gone through at the hands of her grandfather and her formative years, the rapes, the beatings, and everything else. And when she went on the lam, as you guys call it, and she ended up in Florida, and she met Taria Moore, the lesbian girl. Now, serial killers, psychopaths don't love anybody but themselves. But Lee adored Taria Moore. She would do anything for that little girl. And that little girl, Taria Moore, was the one that would give love back to Lee. And Lee went with probably 200 clients or Johns. And she only killed 6. I put it down to 7, and I actually put Taria Moore at one of the homicides, although the police don't like to hear it. And she only killed 6 or 7. She shot them. Why did she just kill those 6 or 7? She had so many customers who risked their careers and their relationships with their partners, willing to go to court and say, no, she was a good girl. You paid her the money. She did the business. And we all went our happy ways. And I've used a several times sort of attitude. The guys she beat up or shot were guys that were supposed to be upstanding members of the community, except one, the first one, who was a woman beater anyway, who were engaged. One was a Bible thumper, another one was an ex-cop. And they started knocking her about and refused to pay and started hitting on her. And you're in a dark wood with some bloke like that, and she pulled out her revolver and shot them. And she stole their money. Of course she did. They got what they deserved. And in fact, we have serial killers in this country, men who use prostitutes and beat them up. And at the end of the day, with several of ours, if those girls had had a revolver and shot the guy in the first place, there wouldn't have been another string of murders.
No, agreed. No,
I mean, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I'm just saying that's a matter of fact.
Yeah, there's a spectrum. Just because 2 people both killed 7 other people, the motivations for that are significantly different. Hers, like you said, hers is more of it was a transactions that are going bad. This is her opportunity to get out. She does not have the power, physical power, in a lot of those situations. What she has is the equalizer. She has the gun that allows her to escape from those. But you also have just using killers. You have mob hitmen. You have people like that it's part of their job, and somehow or another they're able to separate the fact, and they aren't, I wouldn't believe necessarily, they aren't necessarily psychopaths. They do have families and children that they actually love, but their job is an enforcer for, the mob, or they're, paid to murder, and they're able to compartmentalize those two things. It isn't about what I would think with Ted Bundy. It's about the power for Ted Bundy. He was wronged by a woman, so he's going to display his power, the power he doesn't have in real life. He's going to display it here on these women. And I think you see that a lot. It's more the power that manifests in its sexual nature for a man. Those to me are the true serial killers. I don't know what your thoughts on that. I could be completely off.
Well,
I don't have,
What you'll find is with Bundy and with everybody else, and I'll come to Harvey Carrigan, Half the Hammer in a minute in Minnesota.
Sure.
There's this transference of blame.
Yeah.
It's not my fault. It was the girl's. It was pornography, basically, in Ted's case. You get it. It's law enforcement's fault. They stitched me up. It's the justice system's crooked. I had a bad upbringing. I had bad potty training. My mum only used to let me have green top milk, and I wanted blue top milk. Oh, I fell downstairs and bumped my head on the flight of stairs. They always blame something else. Now, Harvey the Hammer, who's at MCF at Stillwater, I interviewed him. He's built like an ape, very strong. He's in his 80s now, but he's a very softly spoken guy, funny enough. Ugly as sin, Half the Hammer. And I were corresponding with him for several years. And then when I interviewed him, I said, he said, and he was telling me, Chris, he said it was their fault. He said, I picked them up. I tried to help her fix her car. And she accused me of raping her and wanted money. And I didn't want to be accused of rape. So I hit her with a tire iron. And it was an accident and she fell down dead. So I had to chop her up. I said, but Harvey, I said, you can't explain away 50 mistakes.
Just 50 misunderstandings. It was just 50 misunderstandings.
I mean, and that's where I know your viewers will probably think I'm up the wall, but there is this humor, black humor, that I put in my books, a bit like Bill Bryson goes off on a tangent with his books. I do with mine, because when you're working with law enforcement, there's a terrible tragedy involved, but sometimes there's a bit of black humor. And it lightens the load. I don't want my readers going to bed, and I always say no nightmares, please. But I want them to come along on the journey with me. And sometimes when it gets very bloody and horrible and disgusting and dirty, sometimes it's nice to bring the reader back to a funny world to make them smile.
Yeah, you can't continuously doom, gloom, blood, torture, misery. You can't constantly hit that, or you will snap. You'll end up in the loony bin yourself. You have to be able to not necessarily laugh at the situation, but unfortunately, the world we're in now, if you even give the slightest hint of a sense of humor about a dark situation like that, that's suddenly a problem. But
look, I come from this. I mean, you probably got, and probably thousands of your watchers will have children. Mm-hmm. And what I always think of at the bottom line is how would I feel if my little daughter or my young son was snatched by somebody off the street, abused, cut up, beaten, raped, chopped up, and dumped like garbage? How would I feel?
I have thought of that many times personally. Yeah. Right.
Now, that's my bedrock. That's where I come from with my work. If I can assist the police in some small way, which I've done on several occasions, bringing closure. I've had with one of Shawcross's victims, a boy called Jack Blake. He was 12 or something like that. Never found much of him. His sister, I met her and she had her hair done. She lived in a rundown house in Rochester, New York. Her family came round. She'd had her hair done specially. She got some English tea for me and the crew, and she kept looking out of the window. And I said, "What are you looking at?" And she said, "Oh, well, I think Jack will come down the road one day. We look at every day for him to come home." Now, I got Shawcross to admit on camera to that homicide. I had it done in Texas. Kenneth McDuff, a young prostitute, went missing, never found. Her mother had been out digging up the dirt roads of Waco for years, every night. She was a broken woman. I sat with her and I said to her, "Look into the camera and ask Kenneth Macduff to give you your daughter back, just like his mother, Adie, would look after his body after he's been executed. And I got a result out of Macduff. They found a corpse. And I went back to talk to the woman, and when I was talking to her, and I'm an ex-Marine, I don't, and the relief on her face, and I had to go outside and smoke. I smoke, as you can see, and I smoked 20 cigarettes, and I sobbed my heart out with her husband with his arm around my shoulder, and he said, "Christopher, what you've just done is just, you will not believe how relieved." Now that's where the bedrock comes from.
Yeah.
And if I've got a chance to do that, that's when the writing becomes very serious.
Have you had attended some of the executions of these individuals? I mean, are the families there? Did that also give them some type of closure, whether or not people believe in capital punishment or not? A lot of times you'll see the families of the victims there, and it gives them some semblance of closure to know that that person got what they considered to be the just reward for their action.
Well, I can't speak for them.
Yeah,
I've seen executions. I've seen them in Pakistan. I've seen them all over the place. I mean, it doesn't mean anything to me at all. But what I will say is that on capital punishment is something I'm always asked about, and it's something where I don't sit on the fence. But a very famous New York judge once said to me, "Christopher, society makes the laws.
right.
If you park on a double yellow line and get a ticket, don't complain about it. If you go out and slaughter and butcher women and children and there's a death penalty, you've hung yourself. We merely supply the rope.
Right.
It's your problem." And I have to look at it like that way. But on the other hand, there are a lot of parents who've lost loved ones who actually will forgive the killer.
They are stronger people than I am, because I would not. I would not be able to do that. I mean,
so when we talk about the capital punishment debate, I always say to somebody saying, "Well, the anti-death penalty," I say, "Well, look, is that sort of thing? Is that your photograph of your little daughter on that mantelpiece going to school?" You say, "Yeah." I say, "Well, how would you like to see her chopped up in bits by the side of the road?"
Yeah.
And never come home, like Bundy did with Kimberly Leach, left her in a hog shed, just in Florida. How would you feel then about capital punishment?
Yeah, it's easy to say those type of things and have those opinions when it hasn't hit you yet, right? And no, I'm a firm believer in allowing the people to vote. They vote for what they want to have, and the people in Florida have said yes, capital punishment is acceptable, and so it is.
It's not for me in England.
Yeah,
poking my nose into what Florida statutes are on capital punishment. That's none of my damn business. It's up for the taxpayers of Florida who've had a guts full of having their kids and their elderly beaten to death for a few dollars. And the interesting thing is, have you always noticed that the minute they're on death row, they start their appeals and, "Oh, well, I was badly represented by my brief and my lawyer, and I've turned to God."
Oh yeah, they'll become ordained. The appeal process will last 20 years. I mean, that alone is just no new evidence necessarily. Just appeal after appeal. Give you 7 appeals to determine, okay, yeah, you're good and guilty, and it's been 25 years later. Most of the family of your victim has passed away natural causes at this point, and you're still there. I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of. If the public says capital punishment is okay, then I'm with it. I'm down with that. I just like to have the choice. I like to have the public be able to vote for it. So, but let me ask you this though, because you mentioned about being in England versus Florida, things like that. You have interviewed people all over the world, and I'm just maybe reaching here a little bit. Do you happen to think that violence is maybe potentially a byproduct of the society where the offender comes from? And I'm just meaning people around the world have a different opinion of Americans than Americans have of themselves. Americans think that they are one way, and when they go over to a different country, they find that other people think differently of them. Have you found in your discussions that maybe that aggressiveness, that rudeness, that kind of the prevailing opinion of Americans that breed some of these individuals versus Japan or some of these other countries, which are much more conformist, much more buttoned up. It's all about honor and respect. And do you happen to see any differences in that, or am I just reaching?
Well, we're looking at the current events at the moment with the Donald and the rioting and the incitements. Now,
right.
I'm actually writing another book called On Trump, which is going to be totally different to anything anybody else has written yet. I've got a tremendous amount of respect and love for the American people, per se. Mm-hmm. I network very, very well out there. They're very open to me. I can go anywhere in the US and law enforcement will network left, right, and center. By and large, yes. But the same applies in Russia. The Russians are so welcoming. Ukrainians are so love the Brits. It's unbelievable. I spend a lot of my time, I live in the Philippines. I worked a homicide case last November out there of a working girl being hacked to death. Beautiful girl. Help homicide police in Makati sort that out. But basically, most people are good. Where I think there is a problem, and this might upset your viewers, is there seems to be a neurosis setting in, which is feeding and feeding and feeding. Mm-hmm. And this, I know a lot of very talented, intelligent American men and women who've got good careers, and yet they carry guns. They're fearful of going to school without taking a firearm. That doesn't prevail anywhere else in the world to that degree.
Right.
The Philippines, like the Wild West, is shooting. Everybody's getting shot every 5 minutes with Duterte's killing drug dealers like it's gone out of fashion, But America, for a very advanced society who claims to be the most powerful nation in the world, there is a neurosis, and all the people I talk to, God bless them, say we are becoming more fearful.
No, I can absolutely, I can attest to that personally. Obviously, I live in Florida. And I was also in the Marine Corps in the United States. And if you have
well done, buddy boy.
if you have that military background in Florida, it is incredibly easy to get the permit for a firearm. I mean, I walked in and 20 minutes later I had it signed, where most people will have to wait, for an extended period of time for their background checks and get everything set up. With a military ID or a military history in Florida, especially, 20 minutes, I filled out a piece of paper, I showed them, and I'm done.
I can't speak for you guys, but it's quite obvious. If you were a veteran and you've been trained to use a firearm, then why not let you have one? You're responsible. You're responsible right. adults. But you get a lot of rednecks walking into some store and buying an arsenal, and they probably work for mum and pop's candy store and sell socks for a living door to door, and then you start giving them an arsenal. They put flak jackets on. They want to become soldiers, prancing around in the woods. I mean, you as a Marine, and me as a Marine, and the Special Forces, the SEALs, and the SBS in this country will look at these people like they're a load of morons.
Yeah, true. I don't have any other words of wisdom on that. I just say true. Yes.
Their argument is, if the boys want their toys, let them have their toys.
I have two more questions, if you don't mind, and maybe go on a little bit lighter note here. You also wrote a book titled "Serial Killers at the Movies," and talking about some of those mass murders that you've talked to. And I think that I do want to make sure that everybody understands the really interesting part of, especially the Talking with Serial Killers books, are these books really are filled with serial killers in their own words. That's right? I mean, they're kind of the how they interacted with you. You really get to understand their mindset and what they say.
More or less, that is so. Not with a lot of it's done with correspondence, but face to face, I've interviewed 30. The way the genesis of this was, years ago, I was asked to do a program in London on a famous case where an English boy was hanged, Craig and Bentley case. He was hanged. He shouldn't have been. It was fit up by the police. And I did it. Fraser Asher, he was the producer of this show. And then years later, I was talking to him, and I said, I've been writing to serial killers in America. And I've got loads of their letters, their own words. And he said we could turn that into a TV series. So we went and made this TV series. Now, this was the first time ever in television and criminal history where a television journalist, criminologist, had gone into these facilities and allowed the killers to describe everything in their own words without having anything redacted. That was the first time it ever happened. And then John Blake, my publisher of 20 years now, he took a brave leap and said, look, we could do a book with that. Mm-hmm. And people were shocked. Why are you letting these people say these things? And we said, well, if we don't hear them and don't try to understand them, we won't learn anything.
Right.
And that was the first of the Talking with Serial Killers, which is now becoming funny enough, an international brand, the Talking with series. So that's how it started off.
Well, in terms of serial killers at the movies, and you're talking about these are people that you've talked to that have also had movie representations. Can you give me an example of maybe one that you thought really got it right, and then one that you thought was just way off?
Well, just to correct you, I didn't interview all of them,
sure,
but quite a few of them. The one. I mean, I'm not going to plug Monster with Charlize Theron because I think she did a brilliant job. That's in the book.
Yeah.
The idea of the book is to give people a guide of what to watch if they're into serial killers and mass murderers. Mm. Some guidelines, and I've used about 12 chapters of different ones. Now, the one that I thought was exceptional was Gacy with Brian Dennehy.
Okay.
Now, I did Gacy, and I met all the cops, Joe Kozenzak up in Chicago, Des Plaines. I did that, and that was a really good. It's a long program. It's two-part. It's TV, and it's a well put together program. There was no exploitation at all in it. Now, the Amityville Horrors. Everybody knows horror films. Will remember the Amityville Horror of 1974 at Long Island. Ronnie DeFeo, interviewed him at Greenhaven Correctional Facility. There have been more movies made about that bullshit, made about that case, claiming to be true, based on fact. Well, and what they're doing is they stick Amityville on the bloody label, and they know people are being mug enough to go and pay money to go and watch it or buy the DVD or whatever you call it, while they're pissing over the graves of the 4 dead children and the parent. That I find disgusting. Middle of the road, I think, obviously Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, so yeah, because I mean, honestly, that guy to me seems too amazing, too impressive, it doesn't seem realistic from the standpoint that he just knows everything from everywhere and can read you so well, and it didn't seem like he has a whole lot of weakness. I mean, I like those characters that have that brilliance, but then some weakness in them as well.
Tom Harris pulled a magic trick. He'd actually been down south, and he'd met a doctor in a prison who was a killer, a one-off killer called Dr. Trevino. And he met him, he was wandering around, and Harris actually thought he was interviewing another killer, and he actually thought he was the prison doctor. He happened to be a killer. and what happened was Trevino had only killed his gay lover when he was young. They had a little gay fight, they had a little spat. And he chopped him up and put him in a box and buried him on his dad's farm. And that was all that Trevino did. And Trevino was actually released in his later years and went on to treat members of his community free, medically treat them free. And everybody said he was a wonderful doctor. What Thomas Harris did, he took this innocuous little man and turned him into Hannibal the Cannibal and Hannibal Lecter. And it's brilliant the way he's done it. I mean,
it's amazing.
The film is good. Sir Anthony Hopkins and his co young girl,
Jodie Foster. Yeah,
Jodie Foster were actually trained by the FBI to what they're looking for. The whole film was supported by the FBI from start to finish. The forensics were supported, although there's a manipulation about playing games. And it worked. And then you come back to, oh, well, we've made a couple of trillion, zillion bucks out of this. Let's do a sequel.
Right.
But as I said on a TV program the other day, the more sequels you get, the faster downhill it goes.
And maybe that's where I started, because once initially the initial movie, you're absolutely right. It was absolutely brilliant. As he got farther along, then he started to do things that I just found to be a little too incredible. Physically incredible, and so, but he has to get that way. The monster always has to get bigger with every movie.
I've got Seven, the movie Seven, Morgan Freeman.
Yes.
Now that's a brilliant. I'll tell you, the angle was good because it's the Seven Deadly Sins.
Yeah.
As improbable that no serial killer would suffocate somebody to death in a bowl of porridge or keep him alive for a year. How is he going to feed him? Or
right.
Got the pound of flesh with the lawyer. There are underlying currents there which are good. You've got the Green Mile I've got in the book, which is brilliant. Mm-hmm. But then you look for subtle nuances like Percy Wetmore, the prison guard. Wetmore, he didn't wet the sponge. There's lots of little things like that in it that the reader looks at. I've got the Chainsaw Massacre, which never happened, although it's supposed to have happened. And that was all filmed all over the place with Ed Gein, links with Ed Gein in it, and all mixed into the bowl. There's some really good stuff. And I'll tell you where you'll get a lot of the best stuff is on indies and on TV documentaries. And I try to guide the reader along those lines rather than it being a critique of each film.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. I have one last question for you, and and then we're coming right up on the hour here. So, what is your final opinion? I didn't really ask you that, and I know we kind of danced around it a little bit, and you may not even have one. But after all these discussions, are serial killers? Are they born? Are they made? Or is it somewhere in between? And we aren't able to predict. I mean, that's always that's what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to be able to say, well, okay, we have predictors here. This person had a certain upbringing. Potentially they have a certain familial makeup. We need to watch these people. Do you find any truth in that? Or is somebody just born with something defective in their brain?
A serial killer, it used to be nature versus nurture. Now it's nature and nurture. You can't predict what these people are going to do no more than you can predict a gunman running amok suddenly and shooting little kids at school. They just come out of the blue. They look like the normal person in the street next to you. They could be friendly. They could be helping you with your shopping or mow the lawn or something like that. And all of a sudden they become a homicidal maniac. You can't predict it. And anybody that thinks, I mean, there are lots of these social scientists spending millions of dollars and pounds trying to come up with sort of these psychological matrices to try to plan if somebody's going to be a killer because he's wet his pants when he was young. I mean, it's all bullshit. They're wasting their money. If you ever bump into a serial killer, it's going to be too late.
Well, I think they really should spend their money on a psychological evaluation of the women who love serial killers. I'm telling you now, that to me is much more befuddling to me than.
Way to go, bro! I love that one.
I mean that's amazing. So thank you so much, Christopher, for joining the show today. I really appreciate it. I know, again, your most recent book just came out. What was that? Talking with Serial Killer Stalkers, I believe, is the most recent book, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Anything else that you're currently working on or that you'd like to take a moment and promote?
Well, really, I've got this book on mass murderers that's coming out. That's a different sort of thing altogether, and that's devoted to mass murderers and spree killers, which are a different breed. And I am working on one on Donald Trump, and I am watching the developments because apparently, according to some conspiratists, he's down in Texas at the moment, and he's amassing a lot of tanks, and they've got laser-guided beams going to chop down all the tanks.
There are so many conspiracy theories going on. You cannot keep them straight. And
I'm waiting for Armageddon on the 20th with delight.
Yeah, I mean, it is something, boy. I tell you what. Sometimes when you live somewhere, and you do think to yourself, what do people outside of where we live think of us? They must think we're just a bunch of dumbasses. I mean, honestly.
I'll tell you how I want to end this. I want to say God bless America. I've traveled extensively out there. I really do love you people. I mean, you are great. Keep your heads together. Don't get too paranoid. And God bless America.
Well, thank you so much. That's a great way to end it. I really appreciate it, Christopher. Thanks, and maybe I can talk to you again. I had so many more questions. I had pages and pages of questions that we just weren't able to get to because it's such a big topic. And but I would love to do that again. It was great to talk with you. Thank you.
God bless you all.
Thank you. Have a good evening. So, Christopher D., we talked serial killers. We tried to get into the mind of the serial killer a little bit. Man, there really is so much more that I wanted to talk about. There's so many other people. It's so hard to predict. You really cannot predict who is a killer and who is not a killer. Two psychopaths could be standing right next to each other. One could be the CEO of Facebook. One could be a serial killer killing sorority girls at Florida State. They, essentially the exact same mental deficiency. One is able to channel that into something quote unquote societally good, and one is not. I agree that I do not believe that just because your upbringing was hard, that predisposed you to hurting other people. I think there are way too many people in the world who had a tough upbringing, who haven't gone that route, who haven't killed people, who haven't determined, I'm going to take my power and equities out on you and everyone who looks like you. So there's got to be something else inside the brain as well that's broken. Not just that people didn't treat you the way you thought you should have been treated, or you didn't get the ribbon when you came in 7th place in the high school track meet. It's got to be more than that, but I don't know that we're ever going to figure it out. I think some people just have mental defects. I think the bigger question, and I brought it up multiple times, are the people who are satellites of these killers, the women who are circling around these people, or the men who are circling around the women, like Jodi Arias. That to me is more confounding. What about what that person has done and who that person is attracts you to them? What do you find attractive about Ted Bundy or Arthur Shawcross or the Hillside Strangler or Jeffrey Dahmer? Any of these, what do you find attractive and interesting about those people that makes you want to be near them? Is it the fact that they're a little dangerous? You can be close and a little dangerous, but at the same time they're behind bars, so you're relatively safe? Or do you just have some innate, deep down desire to be a victim? I mean, to be one of these people? I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. I don't understand why anybody would be a part of it. But it's a huge, huge phenomenon. Most people I know who are interested in serial killers and true crime are women. Something about it is exciting. So who knows? Maybe you can let me know what it is. You can contact me on the Prove Me Wrong Gmail account. It's provemewrongcast@gmail.com. That's our email. You can send me your rationale as to what about serial killers or true crime is appealing to you. Let me know. You can also do that on Facebook. You can drop us a line. You can drop us a line as well on either one of the video platforms that we use. We use YouTube and Rumble. I would recommend that you go ahead and like and subscribe to the YouTube account, the Rumble account. You'll be notified when a brand new episode is released. We release them once a month. Or once a week, I'm sorry. So every week you'll get a brand new episode of the podcast. Let us know what it is that you find interesting or attractive about these individuals who are so clearly broken. If you're just looking for ways to listen to the podcast itself, you can find us on any podcast platform that you use. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Anchor, Podbean, really any podcast app that you use, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the program, and you will be notified when a brand new episode is released. So it's totally up to you. Like and subscribe, and send us a note as to what your thoughts are. Before we go tonight, I'm going to talk about our sponsor. Our sponsor tonight is ZendoZones citronella burners from JT Eaton. There's my ZendoZone. They are shaped like fearless bug repellent tiki gods. Okay, so it's a tiki god. So let Surf and Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily Bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones. They're perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. So they are available on Amazon.com and at select Ace Hardware stores. If you go to an Ace Hardware store and you find that you don't see them, you can also drop us a line on that, provemewrongcast@gmail.com, and let us know what store and what address, and we'll see if we can't get them in there. So once again, for my guest tonight, Christopher Berry-Dee, his book series is Talking with Serial Killers. And fascinating discussion tonight. You can find him online again, ChristopherBerry-Dee.com. My name is Pete Lieb. This is the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we will talk to you again soon.